All right, good evening, everybody. I started to say good night, and then you'd all walk out if that were the case. We're just a few folks arriving, just coming on in the door at this point. Glad to see everyone. It's really nice to see people's faces again, and to see how good it looks when you're smiling and engaged and connected. I want to say hello to everybody who's online as well. We're just now beginning the Senior Ministers Bible Study here at First Community. This is it's called On the Road Again. What we're doing in this study, and I'll say this to everybody in the room, is we're going to look at the text tonight that I'm going to preach next Sunday in the pulpit in all four services. I'm going to look a little bit at last week's text just to kind of show how I approach the sermon writing assignment and what I do with all that, and then we'll get into next week's text, and hopefully, people have said this to me a lot, and they mean well when they say this. It's so much more interesting when I know what you're talking about. So hopefully this sermon will be more interesting for you next week, because now you know the way my crazy brain works and some of the things I want to look at with you all. So for those of you online, sign in, please. Let us know you're here. We would love to know that you're with us. We're trying to keep track of how many folks are participating in this, and you just put in a note on Facebook saying hello from wherever is great, or you can sign in on fcchurch.com. All right, let me make sure that everyone has one of these. This is the course plan for the next 4 weeks, and you can see that I went ahead and put week 1 on there, which was last Sunday's sermon, and like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit. And there's a couple other things that we will work on this evening. Let me tell you about some of the resources that I'm using, and you're welcome to purchase these on your own. This is the New Cambridge Bible Commentary on the Gospel of Luke. Amy Jill Levine, you might have heard me quote her before. She is an agnostic Jew and a New Testament scholar. She's brilliant. She writes with Ben Witherington, who is an evangelical Christian scholar. So two very different views, and they argue back and forth in this. If you're a mega church nerd like me, this is a great commentary to read. That came out in 2018. This other one, I think I listed these on your course plan. The other one is by Fred Craddock, who wrote this commentary on the Gospel of Luke in 1990. Fred was a friend of mine and a mentor. Was named somewhere in the 90s as one of the 10 greatest preachers in America, and he's been gone now for about 7 or 8 years in the resurrection. But his work is still outstanding. And then another resource that if you're into history at all and you want to read some history that has serious effect on the foundation of our religion, this would be a great book to read. It's called The Herods. It's by Bruce Chilton. It's the history of the Herod Dynasty. Now, how many of you knew there was more than one Herod? Some of you did. Holy cow, great. I got 3 of them up here that we're going to talk about tonight, because they all are involved in the story that we're going to look at for next Sunday. But I want you to hear this quote from one of the persons who recommends the book, Scott McKnight from Northern Seminary. Throughout, Chilton has his eye for wisdom about governance on the dangers of religiously based empire. Sound like anything we should pay attention to these days? On the dangers of religiously based empire as he meanders through the twists and turns and tortures of these potentates. That's a really good review, especially now that I've read it. And like I said, we'll get into it a little bit. If you want a fun book to read, it just came out this year, and I read several Christian journals, and the review was terrific. I bought it on Amazon, got it the next day, and I think I finished it 2 days later. Actually flying on a plane out to California is when I finished it. So those are the resources I'm using. The other one, this one's called a Bible. And you don't have to have a hard copy like this. You can get a Bible app. Some of you looks like you got your phones out. The Bible Gateway app on your phone is probably the best one that you'll find. It's an outstanding app. It's got 25 or 30 different translations. The one that Jesus prefers you to use is the New Interpreter's, the New Revised Standard Version. That's my friend Jesus from Tijuana who says that, actually. The New Revised Standard Version, the best study Bible out there is the New Interpreter Study Bible, which is out of print. You can find it, though, on Amazon for used versions of it. If you want to look super religious and super cool in the preacher world, you have to buy the leather cover so that it holds open like that, because it looks like you've really been studying really hard. So that's one of my favorite things too, is to use that Bible. All right, I'm going to do a little bit. Can you see this? Can everybody see this all right? How's your picture there, Zach? Can you get this on okay? Good. I'm going to try to go over on this side and not be in Zach's way so the folks online can see. I'm going to share a little bit about my sermon writing process. I know you didn't sign up for that, but I think it might be kind of interesting to show you how I think and how this works. And this was also my dissertation at Claremont. So if it's boring, well, dissertations are always boring. That's how that works. I think I approach the text, the biblical text, from two sides. From this side over here, I start with the world, the USA, Columbus, and First Community. Over here, I start with exegesis. Anybody know what that means? Basically, it's a fancy word for scientific study of the text. It asks who, what, when, where, why. Who wrote it? Where did they write it? Who did they write it for? Those kinds of questions. What's the context? What's happening in the broader world? That's all that sort of background material. And it also does, it's a little bit of textual analysis too. What does this word mean? What's the grammar here pointing toward? That sort of thing. The next one is theology. What's the theology of the text? I'll say a little bit about that. And then my favorite word, hermeneutics. Is it EU or there? Thank you. I got an A in the class, but a C- in spelling. So here's what we do. And you can just help me right now. We'll do it real quick. What I do is I make lists. What's happening in the world right now? Yeah, Ukraine. You think? I'm gonna write Putin. Other stuff is going on. What about the USA? What's happening right now? Anything? Gas. Thank you, Vladimir. Columbus. What's going on in Columbus right now? No masks. Okay, good, yeah. First Community, what's happening? Divine intervention. We need to talk later. I didn't know this was happening. Okay, so then usually when I'm doing this is my Monday morning work. So on this side, I make these lists, and usually there's 3 or 4 or 5. If there's a lot of stuff going on, it might be 8 or 9 or 10 things that I write down, just so I'm connecting with what's happening in the world, in the country, in our community, and at the church. Then over here on the exegesis side, I really make long lists about all the stuff going on in the text. Who wrote it? Where was it written to? Who was it written to? Where was it written from? What's the context historically? All those sorts of things. Then I get into the theology. My professor at Claremont, Rolf Knierim, he used to say that when you look at theology, you want to understand what is the fuel that's driving the engine of the text. This is sort of it was to stay in the car metaphor. This is sort of the body of the car. What's the fuel? What's it running it? What's the energy that's bringing to that? And then hermeneutics is a fancy word for interpretation. How do we interpret this word, this ancient word, for today? And so I'll start. I'll just write fuel here. On hermeneutics, I'll think of well, let me back up. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. So, on Sunday, a couple days ago, I preached on Jesus being tempted in the wilderness. And when I got into the exegesis part, I started on this side. I do have, I'll confess my sin. I do have a tendency to start with the Bible. I'd never ignore what's going on in the rest of the world, but I do have a tendency to start on this side. Now, sometimes if something major happens, like on 9/11, I had done all this work on Monday morning, and then 9/11 was a Tuesday morning, you remember? I threw all this work. I threw all this work away and went over to the other side, which was like, what the heck am I going to preach on? That was really the main thing. But for Sunday, Jesus is tempted by the devil. So I look at all the stuff, and even a little bit of this bled into the sermon. If you heard the sermon, I talked about the word devil comes from the word diabolos, which comes from the word satan, which we hear Satan, and it really means the accuser and the prosecuting attorney and all that. So a little bit of that came out. On the theology side of it, I really focused on the idea that the temptations for Jesus weren't the problem. The temptations themselves weren't the problem. Because later he'll feed hungry people. Remember the temptations? Go up to the top of the temple, throw yourself down. He'll do some miraculous stuff. Take over politically. Well, he basically comes and says the kingdom of God is so different from how you people think that the last will be first and the meek will inherit the earth. So he does all that stuff. But what's the temptation? Do you remember? Power and control. Now, go to the other side. So do you think we have anybody who's been tempted for more power and more control? I think so. And I'm not trying to be silly about that at all. And that really then pushed me forward. But then also, as I'm doing this work, and I began to think about First Community, well, as a congregation, we have a lot of power. We have so many gifts and capabilities and opportunities and things that the average UCC Church, United Church of Christ, or Disciples of Christ Church, which is our two denominations, don't have. The temptation for us is power and control. Not politically correct, but power and control. And then on an individual level, that's really true. And I try to work some of those things into the sermon. So that's part of what we're doing tonight. Is we're going to work on this side mostly. We'll do a little bit where we look at this side and get into the text and all that's going on with Luke chapter 13 verses 31 to 35. Okay, if you want to get your Bibles out or your app out or whatever you like to do, we will read the text. Sorry, I'm moving around. Zach, hope you can find me there, okay? What versions of the Bible do y'all have as I'm looking for the text here? What do we have? New Revised Standard Version? Yes, okay, good. What else are you reading? Harper. Is that Harper's Study Bible? Yes. So that's New Revised as well? Or that's actually the Revised Study Version. It's not New Revised, it's just the Revised. Yeah, what else we got? Oh, David Bentley Hart. Wow, that's some radical stuff, James. Okay, cool. What else do we have? Any others? New International. Okay, solid version. Yeah, good. Anything else? Anybody have the Message? No, that's okay. I already looked at it. All right, I'm going to read. You can follow along with whatever version you have. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, "Get away from here, for Herod," note that name, "wants to kill you." He said to them, that he is Jesus, "Go and tell that fox." The word fox is not a nice word. Okay? I won't get into it, but it's not a nice word. I told Julie what the word is, and she's like, don't say that. Listen, you tell that fox, listen, I'm casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow. And on the third day, I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day, I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you, and I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord." All right, some background notes for you on all of this. As we'll talk about the Herods in a moment, as Jesus is getting closer to Jerusalem, he starts focusing on Satan and sin. He starts focusing on death and resurrection. These topics start to dominate all the things that he's doing between now and what we call Palm Sunday. In this text, we hear from Antipas. Earlier in Luke chapter 13, there's a story about Pilate and the outrages of Pilate. Have you heard this story? It's earlier in the text. It's mentioned that there's a number of Pharisees who were killed by Roman soldiers in worship. Now, I want to say a word about Pharisees. Here in the text, we heard, now they came to him and said, "Jesus, we need to warn you, Herod's out to get you." He's looking for you. We just got to warn you, he's going to try to kill you. The scholars are in disagreement. Some think that that's a genuine warning. Others think that they're trying to throw Jesus off so that he won't go to Jerusalem because they don't want him to get engaged with this. They don't like the problems that he's causing. I think it's a genuine warning. The word Pharisee, you can look it up in Merriam-Webster or whatever the dictionaries are. You can look it up and it will say that a Pharisee is a rigid, judgmental, strict person. That's kind of what it means in our culture. That's not what it meant 2,000 years ago. Pharisees were actually well respected, extremely knowledgeable. They're theologically together. They lead strong lives. They tithe. They have families. They are respected in the community. In some ways, and hear what I'm saying, you all would be Pharisees. I'm assuming most of you give to the church. I'm assuming most of you are living respectable lives. I'm assuming all that thing. I think that's true about everyone in this room. Now, were there some bad Pharisees who caused some problems for Jesus? Absolutely. He gets challenged by some, put down by others, some serious arguments, and there are some problems along the way. But Nicodemus was a Pharisee. He was one of Jesus' followers. The Apostle Paul in the book of Acts says, I am a Pharisee. I am a Jew and I am a Pharisee, and I follow Jesus. So there's plenty of evidence of Pharisees being good people. Just keep that in mind, that we want to recognize that it's not as simplistic as, oh, they're mean, judgmental, rigid people. They're actually fine persons. Can you find mean, judgmental, rigid people in just about any category of person in the world? Yeah, you can. So I want you to know that when you're reading through. It's not really anti-Semitic, but it plays a little bit into the idea that some of the Jews could be rigid and terrible in that way. Okay, so we also, like I mentioned, we have Pilate who kills all these Pharisees just because they're irritating him. He wants to make a point. And then later we hear this warning from Herod and from the Pharisees about Herod Antipas. So the Herod you mostly know, I'm assuming, is called Herod the Great. He ruled for about 40 years. So back up from 4 BC to whatever that number is, about 39 or so. He ruled for 40 years. He was in many, and what story do you know him from? What is he most infamous for in the Bible? He kills all the boys, the babies in Bethlehem because he's trying to get rid of Jesus. Right. Now, he was a brutal, mean, dastard with a D, dastardly dude. He killed his own family members if he thought they were getting in his way. But he also was somewhat brilliant. I've been seeing a couple of folks who went with us to the Holy Land a few years ago. Steve, you guys too. Sydney went as well. Do you remember our guide, Eod, talking about Herod the Great? He was a master builder. If you ever go to how many of you have been to the Holy Land? Some of you been? A few of you have been. If you ever go again, or if you go for the first time, you've got to go to Caesarea Maritima, where Herod and his engineers figured out a way to let the concrete, or whatever it was called, harden underwater. This is like a major thing. He built a harbor out into the Mediterranean Sea. Caesarea Maritima is beautiful. He had a palace there. Pilate had a palace there. He built outside of Bethlehem. You can still see this because he wanted to have the biggest hill in town. He built his own big gigantic hill and then built a palace up on top of that. He had building projects all over what would have been called Judea in those days. In many ways, he was a brilliant politician. He maneuvered his way through the various changes and revolutions and things that happened in Rome, and was able to always come out on the other side. Now, he wasn't exactly a puppet. He wasn't exactly free to do whatever he wanted. But what this book by Bruce Chilton points out is he really truly was, in many ways, despite his brutality, a brilliant politician who knew how to work with the ruling government out of Rome. And essentially, there was more peace in Judea under his leadership than any other time after that. It was really much calmer because of his strength of character and such. Now, if you were his wife and he got mad at you, you got killed, and that wasn't nice. And there was some mean stuff. So he has 3 sons. He's died, and he has 3 sons: Herod Philip, Herod Antipas, and Herod Archelaus. All three of these sons want to be in charge of Herod's kingdom. They want to be the Herod. And this is part of the confusion. They're all called Herod, and that adds to the confusion. And what happens is the Caesar does not want Archelaus, or does not want Antipas to have any real power. So Antipas gets sent to Galilee, where he rules. Herod Philip is the weakest of the three, and he's basically sent to the desert to a region called Gaulonitis, and he oversees Gaulonitis. Herod Archelaus is the one who gets to rule in what's called Judea. Anybody know what this is? It's the map of this is the Mediterranean Sea. There's the Sea of Galilee. Wander on down here. You got the Dead Sea. Jerusalem's about right there. Jericho's about right there. Tiberias is right there. Essentially, this area here is Galilee. This area here is Perea. This area out in this direction is what was called Gaulonitis. Not Gaul, but Gaulonitis. And then this area here is Judea. And you can see why they all wanted to be the ruler, if not all of it, of Judea, because this is where stuff happens. Here's Jerusalem. Here's Caesarea Maritima over on the coast. It's probably a little farther north up there. All the ports, major things happening here. The major roads cut through here, etc. The one thing that Antipas has is he's got this really fertile valley here. The Jezreel Valley is extraordinarily fertile. If some of you who went to Holy Land, you might remember, our bus drove us through there on our way down to Nazareth. So that gives you a little bit of background of what's going on. And there's constant fear and worry about all kinds of rebellions and rebels and insurrections rising up from within mostly Jewish communities. And Rome, as soon as they find out about it, they're expedient. They just kill you. They don't have a conversation or anything. And in fact, I'm getting ahead of myself there. So I wanted you to see this. Here's where these characters are. Where does Jesus begin his ministry? Anybody know? Galilee. Somebody said Galilee. He begins up here, and so in order to get down to Jerusalem, he essentially is going this way. Then he's going to come up from Jericho, and make his way to Jerusalem. While he's on his way here now, that's when the rumors start to fly about Jesus and the rebellion that he's leading. And that's what's fascinating about reading Chilton's work is Jesus is presented. He's a Christian. He's a brilliant writer and theologian, but he kind of presents Jesus not so much in the biblical story that we all know, but in the context of the story as it's happening at the time and how it's unfolding. In fact, he even thinks that Jesus arrives in Jerusalem in the fall, and that's when he goes into the temple and turns over all the tables. You know that famous story. Again, those of you who've been there on the Temple Mount, it's actually a 20-acre area. And what Chilton argues, and I'd never heard this before, so it was brand new to me, what he argues is Jesus goes in there and turns over the temples and starts a big giant riot. Somebody even reports that Barabbas, remember Barabbas, kills somebody in that riot. And that's maybe perhaps one of the reasons why the people are calling for Barabbas to be saved and not Jesus, because Jesus seems to not be quite what they wanted. I'd have to do a little more research and study. That was fascinating to see. Oh, that's Chilton's view. But that's in the fall, like October-ish. And then you go fast forward all the way to the end of March to Passover, when Jesus is finally arrested, crucified, and buried. So it's much more than just 4 or 5 days. It's more like 6 months. Fred Craddock, by the way, who's one of the commentaries I'm reading, he believes that Jesus may have had a 10-year ministry. It's been compressed by the gospel writers into about 3, but he's one of the scholars out there who says, no, I think it had to have been more like 10. I was talking about this with Julie tonight, and she's like, well, that makes a lot more sense. And it kind of does, doesn't it? I mean, to think that in 3 years, all these things happened versus maybe it was a longer buildup and the rest. So anyway, like I say, it's fascinating stuff. There's another Herod in the New Testament. He's Herod Agrippa. He is not the son of one of these. He's a son of another one of Herod's sons, Herod the Great, and he's the one who deals with Paul in the book of Acts. He's a fascinating character on his own. He seems like like a fairly moderate guy, but he died after only five years in office. All right, there's all the background for you. Let's get in the text a little bit. And again, one of the reasons I go through all this is so that you know the story and what's happening, what's going on. There's political intrigue at every moment in Luke, from this point forward, where Herod Antipas, for example, has killed John the Baptist, had his head taken off. Does anybody remember why? Because John the Baptist was saying, you, Herod Antipas, are committing a moral sin. You've married your brother's wife. He divorced his wife, took his brother's wife. And these sort of things happened in antiquity as political power moves. If you've watched anything about who's the king in England who killed all his wives, Henry VIII, a lot of that was about political expediency. I'll marry the Queen of Spain, or I'll marry the princess from Spain, whoever, so that I can make some alliances. That's what that's about as much as anything else. And it's brutal, it's awful, and it's ugly, and it's kind of a bad deal for the wives. But all this is going on. Pilate's killed all these Pharisees. People are upset. People are concerned and worried. Now there's different rebellions happening. Rebellions are being put down. And like I said, one of the things that Herod the Great was good at was keeping all that in play. He kept all the people happy. He kept the taxes down from Rome. He was fine with being a launching point for the Roman army if they needed to. In fact, that's another thing about Herod the Great. Remember, that's the one from the time of Jesus' birth. He often led his own troops into battle. He was about 6'4", which was huge for those days. People weren't tall naturally. Was a great athlete, was considered a great athlete. He rode the style of horseback riding that he grew up learning in Idumea, which is over here on the eastern side of Palestine. He rode bareback. And the stories told by the historians was that he had extremely powerful legs and could guide the horse with his legs the direction he wanted to go. Was wounded in battle, was almost a mortal wound, but he came back. And so think of the legend that grows around that. We saw him take a spear across his side, yet somehow he survived. All sorts of amazing things about him. Then he dies, and there's chaos. There's a new Caesar. Things are a mess, and it gets chopped up with all these folks. And so now there's all this intrigue, and Jesus is in the middle of it. Okay, you tell that fox. That's not a nice thing for him to say about him. Okay, I already talked a little bit about the Pharisees, and in verse 31 there, that I think they're legitimately warning Jesus about what's going on with him. Another question that comes up is, does Herod really want to kill Jesus? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. He wants to. He wants to silence this guy because that's causing instability for him. It's causing instability for his brother. Although, here's a little more political intrigue for you. If his brother kind of gets in trouble, who can move in and take over in Judea? Now he's got Galilee, Perea, and Judea. He's starting to look like Herod the Great. All these things are happening in the background. So when Jesus, verse 32. Oh, I know what I was saying. Before we get to 32. When Jesus does get to Jerusalem, whether it's in 6 months he's been there or he's only there a few days, when he does get there, he is in serious danger. And there is rebellion everywhere going on. When he gets there, in fact, Pilate wants to make a show of strength, both a genuinely helpful act and a way of saying, we're from Rome and we're in charge. He wants to build an aqueduct to bring a more secure water supply into Jerusalem. Anybody ever seen the movie The Life of Brian? Anybody ever seen it? In The Life of Brian, there's this Jewish rebellion group. These guys who wrote the movie Life of Brian were brilliant. There's this Jewish rebellion group that's meeting in secret, and somebody's saying, yeah, what have the Romans ever done for us? And one of them says, brought security to the streets. Well, yeah, that goes without saying. Of course they did. What about, education? Oh, yeah, people learning to read. That's good. The aqueduct? Oh, yeah, the water was terrible for it. It's a hilarious scene because it shows that the Romans really did do some good things. That's what Pilate wants to do. He wants to do a good thing. And it's also a show of strength. We have the engineers, we have the skills, we have the talent to build an aqueduct. You people don't. In order to do this, what does he have to do? Raise taxes. Raise taxes. Raise taxes. Do we ever talk about that in the United States of America? Not ever. It never comes up at all. No, he wants to raise taxes. And so there's a couple of little rebellions. There's some people protesting in the streets. He goes out to the people and says, come back tomorrow and I will hear your complaints. So hundreds of people gather outside of Pilate's home. Hundreds and hundreds of people gather to express their complaints to Pilate. He listens patiently for a while, and then he gets up on his horse. His horse, that is a signal to his troops, to his soldiers who are not in uniform. They're wearing the clothes of a regular person in Jerusalem. They're mixed in among the crowds. When he gets on his horse, every soldier pulls out a club and begins clubbing to death anybody they can, and hundreds of people die. That's what Jesus is coming into. This, you're not getting excited, but I get excited about this. It's like, oh wow, that really illustrates the text. That really tells you this is a dire time. I would not want to be a protester in Moscow right now. During the Black Lives Matter protests, there was some tough stuff going on. Our son, I'll just tell you this, he doesn't care if I do or not, was involved in some of those protests in Kansas City. And you know what his mom and his dad said to him every time he told us he was going to one? Please be careful. Please stay out of harm's way. Please. And then of course we saw pictures of him at the front of the line, of course. It was terrible, difficult, and that's all that stuff's nothing compared to what's going on in the Middle East 2,000 years ago. And what I love about what Jesus says, let's get back to the text. Verse 32. You go and tell that fox for me. Listen, I'm casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day, I finish my work. Now, on the third day is an allusion to the resurrection. That's probably Luke's version, but it's an allusion to the resurrection. It's also a demonstration of extreme courage and vulnerability. He's not going to let the politicians stop him. He doesn't care if there's clubs hidden under the cloaks of the Roman soldiers. He doesn't care. He's going because he's seen things turned upside down, and he wants to go on his own to make a difference in all that's happening there. Yet today and tomorrow, verse 33 now. Yet today and tomorrow and the next day I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. That's a reference to the prophets in the Old Testament. Oftentimes, like Jeremiah says something very, very similar. Then verse 34. Notice it's really, really fascinating here. Fred Craddock points this out. The first three verses, 31, 32, and 33, are a taunt. He's basically saying, I'm coming to see you. Demons are being cast out. Stuff's happening. I'm not afraid. I'm coming to your city. And then there's this taunt, this powerful statement from Jesus. And then it turns into a lament. That's a very unusual, biblical scholars talk about this all the time. It's very unusual to have that kind of language, and then he almost turns into a weeping, sad moment. 34, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings. Stop there for a moment. It's one of the most beautiful images in all of Scripture of God, portrayed as a mother hen bringing her chicks in to be under her wings to be protected. It's a feminine, female image of God. When people argue about, the Bible calls God a he, let's just call God a he. The Bible starts in Genesis chapter 1 with male and female. God created them in God's image. Male and female. So the first chapter of the Bible makes it clear. It's not about God being genderless. It's about seeing God beyond gender, beyond our understanding of what male and female is, and all the conversations that we're having today about how there's some gender fluidity and all that. The Bible, it's like, yeah, okay, fine. You're created in the image of God. And this is a powerful image to see that the idea of the mother chick or the mother hen gathering her chicks. Then verse 35. See, your house is left to you, and I tell you, you will not see me until a time comes when you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. That, of course, is the famous saying of the people as Jesus rides into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. They're waving branches. They're throwing their clothes out in front of him. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. But it's also, Fred Craddock makes fun of it. Fred Craddock says, sometimes religious people, when they don't know what to say, they shout out religious things just because it sounds good. It's kind of, they're just quoting Psalm 118 because it sounds good. Who knows what they're really trying to say there? A couple more things, though, I want you to see. In 33, like I said, he's announcing his death. But he will. It makes the promise that in the third day it'll be done, and that's a hint to the resurrection. Prophets were killed in Jerusalem all the time. It was a dangerous business. In the Lenten devotional that we wrote, I wrote a devotional on Psalm 51. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation, and renew a right spirit within me. It's a beautiful psalm. Tradition says that King David wrote that psalm after he was confronted by the prophet Nathan for his abuse. Now, I mean that word intentionally, his abuse of Bathsheba. It's a courageous story because Nathan could have been killed. He's the king. Herod wouldn't have hesitated. Any of the Herods wouldn't have hesitated at all to take this holy guy out and kill him, run a sword through him right here, right now. The beautiful part about, and this is what I wrote in my devotion, is that I believe David is remembered as a great king, not because he was such a brilliant general, he was. Not because he was such a brilliant military person, he was. Not because his kingdom was larger than it was at any other time before or since, it was. I believe the memory of David is his willingness to confess his sin. His willingness to say, yes, I've sinned in the eyes of the Lord. The most powerful man in their country confesses publicly, I have sinned. Now, there's no evidence in Psalm 51 that David actually wrote it. There's none. Tradition has looked back and said, oh, he must have, he's the author of so many Psalms, probably not, by the way, but tradition says he must have wrote it. And the reason I think that tradition says that, traditional views of the Bible, is that you can imagine this great leader penning those words. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away. It's such a beautiful psalm. And that when Jesus says, when he reflects back on Jerusalem being the place where the prophets were killed, he knows that so many others of them were killed. So many others of them were dashed on the rocks, thrown out of the kingdom, sent into exile, all those things. He knows what's waiting for him. But then in verse 35, there's a little note of hope there. Look at this. See, your house is left to you, and I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. House there refers to the temple in Jerusalem. Now, the temple kind of gets bad press in Matthew and Mark and John. But in Luke and in Acts, did you know that Luke, who wrote the gospel, also wrote the book of Acts? It's really his 2-volume history of the church. The first volume about Jesus, the second volume about the church and its formation. In Luke, it gets good press. The house will be there for you. It will be waiting for you. In other words, he's saying, you will have a chance. There is hope. There is still hope. You still have time. You still have time to turn your life around. You still have time to begin again, to renew. And that's buried there in that text and in that promise. All right, one last thing, and then I want to open it up to questions. Let's have a conversation about this. Jerusalem is a fascinating place. I read a book at the beginning of the pandemic about Jerusalem titled Jerusalem. It's a great book, and it does the entire history of Jerusalem, going all the way back to Abraham and Isaac, and really even before that, when more primitive peoples were around. Primitive is not the right word for that. Ancient peoples were in that area. And then it traces the history and how Jerusalem built up and was knocked down, built up and was knocked down, about how the Muslims came in and conquered and ruled in Jerusalem for hundreds of years. And then the Crusades happened, and all these stories. Jerusalem is a city that is considered to be a city of peace. It's in the name. Salem is a transliteration of the Hebrew word shalom. So it's literally called the city of peace. Muslims refer to it as the holy city. I forget how to say it in Arabic, but it's called the holy city. But this same beautiful place where three religions trace their roots has been divided for most of its history. Those of you who went there, you remember when we went from the Palestinian section to the Jewish section? Do you remember when we crossed out of right there in the middle of Jerusalem? The line is clearly drawn. You know when you've left Palestine and you've moved into Israel. It's heartbreaking. Frankly, I won't go off on that tangent. But Jerusalem really has been, in many ways, the center of the Western world because it has influenced so much of Western thought through religion, through science, through war. The other thing I always like to point this out to folks. Let me get a clean map here. Because of where Jerusalem is located and where Israel was, here's that map of the Mediterranean Sea, Sea of Galilee, Dead Sea, etc. What's over here? Egypt. Over here in that way is Greece and Rome. Over here is Persia, Babylon, etc. So if Babylon wants to do battle with Egypt, they got to do that. If Egypt wants to fight with Greece and build up their army, a land army, not just their boats, they got to go this way. So basically, this is a really important piece of property. It's about the size of Vermont. I think everyone who I take to the Holy Land is like, holy cow, Holy Land, holy cow. Like the drive from Jerusalem to Jericho is like 25 minutes. And in my head as a kid, I was like, oh, that's like a 3-day walk or something, right? No, it's not. Out to the Dead Sea is even shorter. This is part of the problem with Jerusalem. Okay, I'm going to take a breath. Thank God Julie brought me my notes. I forgot my notes at home, or else I'd still be going because then I would just be rambling about everything I know. I'd love to hear any questions you have about the text, about the sermon writing process, about, in my process, by the way, Monday was my exegesis day. Monday was my open the text, what's it say, what's going on, read smart people like Fred Craddock and Amy Jill Levine and others, and make all those notes. I have to be, as a preacher, I have to be careful I don't get pulled too far into that world side, because there's so much stuff going on. I could be focusing on all sorts. There's a crisis in Yemen. There are crises all around the world in a variety of places. Ukraine is dominating our attention, but I don't want to get too lost in the weeds and all that and forget about the proclamation of the gospel. So Tuesday is the day when I start thinking, okay, what's going on in the world? What else is happening? What ideas and stories are coming to mind? Sarah Keentz had a beautiful devotion in our staff meeting this morning at 11 o'clock. I may use the story she told in my sermon on Sunday. But we have a joke in preacher world. When I say I may use it, it's only Tuesday. So the sermon's germinating around for a couple more days. Love any questions you have about anything at all.
So Jesus is portrayed not as meek and mild and peaceful, he's wanting to stir it.
So Julie's question, for those of you online, and it's my wife who asked the first one, and it's a really hard question too. Is that Jesus is not meek and mild and peaceful, he's wanting to stir it up? The answer is yes. Now there is a meekness that's not a negative about Jesus. There is a strength about him though that sometimes we confuse as weakness. If I'm standing here and someone comes and slaps me in the face and Jesus says I'm to turn the other cheek, who has the power in that confrontation? I do. Yeah, if I turn the other cheek, I'm in control of the situation. You may beat me, you may kill me, but I'm still in control. You are acting in a way that is not in control. So the idea that Jesus is meek and mild is kind of what you and I grew up learning in Sunday school, is that he's so nice. Look at him. Even his long hair is perfectly, and he has white skin and blue eyes too. How that happened in the Middle East, I don't know. They're surrounded by all these brown people, but Jesus popped out white. Sorry, that won't be in the sermon. And are we being recorded? Is this still going online? Forget I said all that. Delete. So yeah, Jesus wants to stir it up, and he really means to stir it up. And I think if I shouldn't go this way, but I will. If you go to the Gospel of Mark, for several chapters, Jesus is like, okay, don't tell anybody this happened. Don't tell anybody this happened. Scholars talk about that as the messianic secret. Why is Jesus not wanting to get out? Well, I think he's not ready to stir it up yet. I think he's not ready to have these confrontations. Luke really kind of has him from the start ready to go. If you go back to Luke chapter 1 and chapter 2 especially, and the birth announcement, the announcement of Jesus' birth is in the language of the announcement of a new Caesar, of a new ruler in Rome, except it's about this baby born in a stall in a little town in the middle of nowhere. Luke's gospel is like, okay, folks, look at what's going on here. Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. Others.
What's the tie to the title of your series?
The title of the series. What's the tie to it? Oh, that's what you said. The title of the series is On the Road Again. Jesus is on the road. And he's traveling, he's on his way to Jerusalem. And so all these stories are stops along the way. We're going to go to a couple other different places. We're going to get to the prodigal son, which is the story of the prodigal going on the wrong road, etc. Except my title for that Sunday is The Prodigal God, which is kind of I've got the footnote on there. You can go read more about that if you want to. So that's the tie, is that we're on the road with Jesus. And I said this, I think, Sunday, or maybe it was 2 Sundays ago. It was 2 Sundays ago. Every one of us have a Jerusalem. Every one of us have a point where we're going to have to confront maybe something about ourselves or something in our families, something at work, whatever it might be. Every one of us have a Jerusalem. And that's in some ways, Jesus is presented as the hero who goes before us. Not a Superman type figure, but as the one who, this week's Sunday is determined, sermon is determined, vulnerable, and courageous. And I really think that's what he's displaying in this story here, especially. Thank you for that. Please.
Yeah, I can't help but the word determined, vulnerable, and courageous is exactly what's going on in the world right now, particularly over Ukraine. So it's very interesting that you've been able to bring those two things together.
Yeah, thank you for that. It really is amazing to see President Zelensky model. Did I say his name right? I think I did. Modeling what courage looks like, modeling what it means to stand with your people. I'll add this too. I consider myself a pacifist, and it's a troubling position to be a pacifist in a world where war happens so often. My view modified after we had a baby. And it really modified. I think Nate was about 3 months old when we were broken into. I was away. We were living in San Diego. I was up in Orange County, just an hour and a half up the road, but a 3-day conference for preachers. Julie was working full-time for court-appointed special advocates. Nate was 3 months old, and he was in childcare all day from like 9 to 5, whatever it was. And so she took Nate. I left to go to Orange County. She took Nate and dropped him off. She went to work all day, came home, and Nate started to cry as soon as he cried a lot, but he really cried this time, and he cried a ton. And Julie was like, "What's going on?" And then she looked around. Every cupboard was open. Every drawer was pulled out and emptied. She walked through the house holding on to Nate, afraid for herself and her little boy. Everything, the whole house was just turned upside down. He stole all of Julie's good jewelry, which at that point in our lives wasn't a lot. But he knew what to take. He stole my autographed Willie Mays baseball glove. A real Willie Mays autograph. And yeah, I mean, jewelry, whatever. And we had a full bar downstairs, and by full bar I mean there was a thing that was built as a bar, and one bottle of Jack Daniels, which he drank 2/3 of. The cop said he had himself a little. He spent the day there, exactly, and there's other things he did too. And so Julie called me. I came home as quick as I could from the conference, and you know, as soon as I walked in the house, we both started to cry, and then of course Nate cried. And the thought I had in my mind was, if he tries to do this while we're here, I'll protect my family. I played a ton of slow pitch softball back in the day. I had a really good slow pitch softball bat. I put it by the bed on my side, and part of me hates that. And I'm not sure what Jesus would say. Honestly, I'm not sure what he would say. You live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. But I think there's a point where it is right to defend those you love. I think let me be really clear about the whole Ukraine thing. It's really complex. You know what happens with what we do and what NATO does and what China does. And I read a bunch. I was up real early this morning, so I read a bunch more, and it's crazy. But there that courageous, vulnerable. I mean, Zelensky's even said, "I might die, but I'm not." What was the line he gave to Biden? "I don't need a ride. I need ammo." You know, you can tell he's a communicator because he really does have a great skill at that. That was good comment. Thank you. Others.
Well, the thing that's been neat is how the goodness of every ordinary person over there in Poland, all opening up their home.
That's one of the beautiful things. You know, it was Mr. Rogers. She's talking about the goodness of people in Poland, especially in the way they're opening up their homes. Kate Shaner reported today, some little country, I don't know which one it was, may now have more refugees than citizens in one of these places. Where was it? Moldova. Thank you. That was it. My wife posted on Facebook a picture that I've seen in a couple other places of these women who bring strollers to the train stations, so that mothers who have babies can take them and use them. Remember, it was Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, who said, when bad things happen, look at the helpers. And that's the beauty of what's going on. Look at the helpers. Look at what's happening there. You know, stories of. Did you hear the story about the Russian soldier who is weeping, openly weeping, and a Ukrainian woman comes up to him and talks to him, and he says, "I just want to let my mother know that I'm not dead," and she gives him her cell phone, so he can call his mom. You know, this is an attacking invader. That's a Jesus story, if there ever was one. Yeah, so that's when people say, well, the Bible's 2,000 years old, it's irrelevant. No, the stuff that was going on 2,000 years ago just seems to keep happening. Tyrants are tyrants, and evil is evil, and there's a ton in our sacred literature that speaks to the stuff that we're facing in our world. Any other questions? Sir, Mike.
Thank you for your opening about your process of creating your sermon. In the short period of time I've been listening to you, I've really been impressed. And I wondered, how long have you been using this process?
So I started my doctoral work in 1992. I was working with this guy named Dick Wing. Does somebody remember that guy? In San Diego at University Christian Church. They had a great Doctor of Ministry program where you could do a 4-hour class in one day. So I took my day off, which was back then was Friday. I'd leave at 5 o'clock in the morning because you don't know LA County traffic. So sometimes I was there at 7. Sometimes I was sprinting through the parking lot to get there at 8 in time for the class. And would be in class all day for 4 hours, and then eat my lunch, spend a couple hours in the library, and then drive on home, usually home by 5 o'clock. So that took me, I graduated in 1995, wrote my dissertation and finished. And I, in a lot of ways, and so that's where that process was. And in some ways, I was doing some of that stuff already. I mean, it wasn't like brand new. It was a way for me to really think clearly. But in many ways, I was preaching 15-minute upbeat messages every night to the youth group when I was a youth minister, every Sunday night. So in a lot of ways, I was already in that skill. I would speak to them, 35 times a year. I'd speak at campfire and summer camp 15 times a summer, all that. So it's just a cumulative thing. Yeah, but yeah, that's when it started. That's when it started. Yeah, it was great. I really love Claremont. It's great. Claremont is a super diverse, super progressive seminary that's been through some financial ups and downs lately. Seminaries are closing left and right. I don't know if you know this, but they can't sustain seminaries. It's a kind of another topic for another time. Please, Steve.
I don't know my synoptics well enough, but this Luke here seems like his tone is different from this story and the other Gospels. Is that true?
It's very good. Yes, you get the A for the day. Thank you. Steve asking about Luke's tone being different from Matthew and Mark, which are the synoptics. Another A for your grade there. The synoptic Gospels, they're called the synoptics because they all follow the same order. Mark's the shortest, probably the oldest. Matthew and Luke just took Mark and dropped it into their work. And then there's another source called the Q source that they took and dropped in. That's a whole other conversation. But Luke really does. He really does. Like the temple conversation is different from the way Matthew and Mark present Jesus going to the temple and what he sees. Now Luke reports it's going to be bad, but the temple is kind of lifted up as a good place. The temple appears in the book of Acts, as that's where Paul and the other followers of Jesus went to worship. So there's none of the Gospels are anti-Semitic, but John can be abused as being anti-Semitic. The tone that some people read into it that's not there, when John says, and the Jews were against him here, and the Jews were against him here, and the Jews did this to him, it's really an inner religious conflict. When he says the Jews, he's talking about the Jews who aren't like us. We're the right Jews. And it's more of a conversation going on in there. So yeah, there's definitely a different tone. And I think the other part that comes up a lot with Luke is he's definitely worried and wants to see Jesus as the champion for the last, the least, the lost, the little. That these are the ones that Jesus came to and we must, the blessed are the poor in spirit is what Luke says. What does Matthew say? I'm sorry, other way around. Luke says, blessed are the poor. Matthew says, blessed are the poor in spirit. You see the change in the teaching. We can't focus too much on the poor. That's good. Don't focus. That's kind of the conversation going on there. Is what are we going to do with this? And so Matthew changes the words. And this isn't part of the tone question, which is a really good question. But in Matthew, that sermon is where? Sermon on the. In Luke, it's the sermon on the plain. So this drives my fundamentalist friends crazy because you can't have both those things be true. Anyway, yeah, that's a good question, Steve. Thank you. Got time for one more. If you got something you want to ask and you're really thinking about it, Rose, I thought you were going to ask a question there. You threw me a curveball. All right, so for next week, you've got the text. For next Tuesday, one thing too, do this. If you don't have to, this is not an assignment, but I would love to hear from you after next Sunday's sermon. If this helped, if there's something you would like me to have done differently, if there's something you'd like me to have brought up, or maybe focused on in the sermon, or focused on tonight, I would really love to hear from you. My email is gmiles@fcchurch.com. And I think you can find it on our Facebook, our website page. Just send me an email. I'd love to hear from you on, like a Monday after you've had a chance to think about the sermon and whatever. Let me know. Hey, you didn't deal with this in the text, or your sermon seemed to go a different direction from what you said on Tuesday night. That's really helpful feedback for me, and I would love to hear any questions or comments you have in that way. Okay? So for next Tuesday, read Luke 13, 1-9. We're going to go back a little bit, and you'll hear that story about the Pharisees being killed and some other stuff. But we're going to take a pause on the road to Jesus and backtrack just a little bit more. All right. Thank you, everybody who's online. Thank you for being with us. Hope you could follow along as we went through tonight. Thank you all for being here in the room. Let's ask God to bless our evening as we depart to our homes. Gracious One, we're grateful for this sacred word, for the many who for 2 millennia have been so careful to copy and repeat and make it possible for us to gather together in one place and listen to these ancient words. Ask your Spirit to open our minds that we might understand. Ask your Spirit to open our hearts that we might receive it. Ask your Spirit to open our hands so that we might be ready to live it. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. I'm tired. Good night. Play, yeah. In Christ's name we play. Let's go play. Thanks, everybody.